What if Meghan Markle's entire pregnancy was nothing more than a carefully staged illusion? Tonight, we dive into the claim sending shockwaves across the globe. Meghan Markle's own father says he saw the straps of a fake baby bump during a private visit in 2019. Thomas Markle, in a chilling statement, says the pregnancy was staged and that when he confronted Meghan, she told him never to speak of it again. Why is he speaking out now? What really happened behind closed doors? And what does this mean for the royal lineage? From hidden hospital records to collapsing baby bump videos and a father's explosive confession, this is the story the palace hoped would never resurface. Stay with us. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In a world saturated with royal scandals and whispered rumors, some stories still manage to ignite a storm unlike any other. This time, it isn't a leaked email, a paparazzi ambush, or an anonymous source fueling speculation. It's a father. A man who helped raise one of the most talked about women on the planet. A man now standing at odds with his own daughter, and who claims he witnessed something so shocking, so fundamentally disruptive, that if true, could cast doubt over one of the most publicized royal events of the past decade. Thomas Markle, father of Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has just stepped back into the spotlight. And what he says he saw in 2019 could unravel years of carefully guarded narratives. According to Thomas, during a private visit with Meghan in early 2019, just months before the birth of her first child, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, he glimpsed something that stopped him cold: a strap. Not just any strap, but one that he claims held a silicone baby bump in place beneath Meghan's clothing. A fake bump, he insists, not the curve of natural pregnancy, but a synthetic illusion. It wasn't natural, he said. I know my daughter. That pregnancy was staged. This isn't the first time Meghan Markle has faced rumors of deception. Ever since her rise to global fame after marrying Prince Harry in 2018, Meghan's name has been a lightning rod for controversy. From the moment the couple announced her pregnancy, social media exploded with conspiracy theories. Eagle-eyed observers zoomed in on video footage of her moving, bending, and sitting, alleging the size of her bump changed too dramatically too quickly. Mainstream media brushed most of these speculations aside as nothing more than fringe theorists chasing shadows. But now, with her father coming forward, the once dismissed murmurs have taken on new weight. The importance of this moment cannot be overstated. This isn't just a private family dispute or a tabloid-grabbing soundbite. If true, this revelation challenges one of the most sacred stories of modern royal life: the birth of Archie, Queen Elizabeth's great-grandchild, a child with American heritage and biracial identity, whose arrival was celebrated as a symbol of a more modern monarchy. If Meghan truly faked her pregnancy, or even if she simply attempted to conceal the use of a surrogate, it would raise deeply uncomfortable questions, not only about her personal authenticity, but also about what she and Prince Harry have told the public, and perhaps even the royal family. But let's rewind. To understand the weight of Thomas Markle's statement, we must understand the context of their relationship, the backdrop against which this explosive claim is made. Thomas was once very close to Meghan. He worked long hours to support her acting ambitions, reportedly paid for her private school education, and proudly watched as she ascended from cable drama stardom to international royalty. But everything changed before the wedding. Amid reports that he staged paparazzi photos and suffered a health crisis, Thomas became persona non grata at the Sussexes' royal nuptials. Meghan reportedly cut off communication, and the two have been estranged ever since. In the years that followed, Thomas has spoken out sporadically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes awkwardly, always controversially. Critics say he's chasing relevance. Supporters argue he's a heartbroken father, pushed out of his daughter's life and seeking answers. But no statement he's ever made comes close to this one. His claim about seeing the fake bump strap didn't come during an angry rant or a tabloid op-ed. It came quietly, almost reluctantly, in an off-camera conversation later corroborated by a freelance journalist who's worked with him for months. This wasn't a planned press release. It was something he had allegedly carried with him for years and only decided to share now after reaching what he called a point of no return. So what exactly did Thomas say? According to those close to him, he had been granted a short private visit with Meghan in early 2019. The circumstances surrounding this meeting remain unclear, especially given their broken relationship at the time. But during the brief moment they spent together, Thomas claims Meghan stood in front of a full-length mirror adjusting her dress. It was then that he noticed a peculiar line beneath the fabric, a seam that didn't look like part of the dress's design. When she raised her arm slightly to fix her sleeve, he claims he caught a glimpse of an elastic-looking strap, similar to what is used in wearable silicone prosthetics. His mind froze. Was she wearing an artificial baby bump? He says he immediately asked her about it, stunned and confused. Meghan, according to him, did not panic or deny. Instead, she reportedly gave him a cold look and said, "Don't mention that again," before walking out of the room. He says the exchange lasted only seconds, but the memory burned into his mind. For years, he remained silent, uncertain whether what he saw was real or a trick of the light, unsure whether to go public. But as time went on and their estrangement deepened, he says he began to believe what he saw was exactly what it looked like, a deception. What does this mean for the public? At the heart of this story is not just a sensational headline. It's a matter of trust, credibility, and what public figures owe to the people who follow them. If Meghan did indeed fake her pregnancy, it would be one of the most elaborate cover-ups in modern celebrity history, one involving not just her husband and staff, but potentially members of the royal household as well. And if Thomas is lying, it paints a disturbing picture of a father willing to fabricate a deeply hurtful narrative for attention. We must also consider the implications of this claim being true in light of the secrecy already surrounding Archie's birth. Unlike previous royal babies, there was no public photo on the steps of the hospital. The exact date and circumstances of his birth were released hours after the event. The name of the doctor in attendance was never officially confirmed. Meghan and Harry later cited privacy concerns and an intense media climate for their decisions. But skeptics argue that this was part of a wider strategy to obscure the truth. So what are we to make of this? In the sections that follow, we will unpack this story piece by piece. We'll explore Meghan and Thomas's rocky relationship, revisit the public's suspicions about the pregnancy timeline, investigate the palace's silence, and dive into what it would mean, legally, culturally, emotionally, if a member of the British royal family staged a pregnancy. We will hear from experts in maternity wear, legal ethics, public relations, and surrogate loss. We will examine photos and footage that fans say show bump inconsistencies and take a closer look at the hospital records, birth announcements, and media handling of Archie's arrival. And we'll keep returning to one essential question. Is Thomas Markle telling the truth? This investigation isn't about scandal for scandal's sake. It's about exploring the integrity of public narratives and asking who gets to shape the truth. Meghan Markle has become a symbol of modern royalty, of biracial success, of female resilience. But no one, not even a symbol, is beyond scrutiny when the facts are this serious. If there is truth to what Thomas has said, it will require a complete reevaluation of how we view the Sussex story. And if it is a lie, it exposes a new level of cruelty in a family feud already steeped in bitterness and betrayal. Stay with us as we dissect the evidence, examine the contradictions, and lay bare the uncomfortable truths that have long simmered beneath the surface of the Sussex fairy tale. March 7, 2021. A date that reshaped public discourse around the British royal family and lit a fire under already tense global opinions about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. On this night, Meghan and Harry sat across from Oprah Winfrey in a California garden and detonated one of the most powerful public interviews in modern television history. The ripple effects were immediate, controversial, and deeply polarizing. What was meant to be a tell-all about their departure from royal duties quickly evolved into something far more incendiary. For 90 jaw-dropping minutes, Meghan detailed her alleged suffering behind palace walls. She spoke of isolation, emotional distress, and thoughts of self-harm. But perhaps the most explosive moment came when she claimed that while pregnant with Archie, there had been conversations within the royal household about how dark his skin might be. That single statement shook institutions. With Oprah visibly taken aback, Meghan didn't name the individual responsible for the comment. She simply said it was relayed to her through Harry, who later joined the interview and confirmed the conversation had indeed happened. The public was left to speculate. Who in the royal family had allegedly expressed concern over the skin tone of an unborn baby? Social media platforms, newsrooms, dinner tables, and podcast mics lit up with questions. Was it Prince Charles? Was it William? Could it be Camilla? The lack of a name only fueled the fire. Speculation turned into suspicion, and suspicion gave birth to outrage. For a royal institution already battling an image of being out of touch and traditionalist, the implication of racism was damning. Within 24 hours of the interview airing, Buckingham Palace released a rare and brief statement. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. That single phrase, "some recollections may vary," was widely interpreted as a subtle yet firm rebuttal to Meghan's account. But even that carefully worded statement didn't stop the tsunami of attention. Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic split into factions. One camp viewed Meghan as a survivor of institutional cruelty who had finally spoken her truth. The other saw a woman weaponizing her platform to damage an ancient institution and reframe herself as a modern martyr. Amidst it all, Prince William, traditionally stoic and reserved, was cornered by a journalist during a school visit just days later. "Is the royal family a racist family?" the journalist asked. William replied curtly, "We are very much not a racist family." That was one of the very few direct public denials from a senior royal. But if the Oprah interview was designed to cement Meghan and Harry as victims of royal indifference and outdated thinking, it had a less predictable consequence. It put everyone who had ever been close to Meghan Markle under scrutiny. Her former friends, family, even past colleagues began being questioned. What were Meghan's real motives? Had she always been a target, or was she expertly shaping a narrative that cast her in the best possible light? In the weeks and months that followed, there was no shortage of opinion pieces, documentaries, and reaction videos dissecting every minute of the Oprah interview. But one person remained notably quiet: Thomas Markle. He had, in the past, expressed regret for staging paparazzi photos ahead of Meghan's wedding. He had publicly pleaded to be allowed back into her life, and he had shared private letters she had written him. These actions had already frayed the remnants of their father-daughter bond. But after the Oprah interview, Thomas watched his daughter recount her pain and accused the institution of racism. He didn't rush to the press with rebuttals or give interviews disputing her experience. According to those close to him, he was conflicted, torn between the instinct to protect his daughter and his growing frustration at being continuously portrayed as the villain in her story. He remained silent for a while, until he began quietly speaking with a few journalists, not on camera, not in interviews, but off the record, in private conversations. In one of these conversations, he reportedly admitted feeling deeply unsettled by what he had watched. Not because of the racism allegation, but because of the timeline Meghan laid out and how certain elements didn't match what he had seen himself back in early 2019. It was during one of these reflective moments that Thomas is said to have first shared the anecdote about the fake bump strap. To the journalist he was speaking with, it sounded unbelievable. Not because Thomas seemed untrustworthy, but because the implications were so enormous. A fake pregnancy? In the royal family? Staged photos, hidden straps, and a father forbidden from discussing what he had seen? As word of this private claim began to circulate discreetly among a few freelance reporters and royal commentators, more attention began to swirl around an already notorious portion of the Oprah interview: Meghan's claim about racism. The attention was largely focused on who had allegedly made the remark, but now a new angle emerged. What if the concern wasn't just about race, but about legitimacy? What if the pregnancy itself had been questioned behind palace doors? At first glance, this seems like a leap. But the logic followed the same patterns conspiracy theorists had been threading online for years. If Meghan's pregnancy was fabricated or concealed behind a surrogate, and if members of the royal family suspected as much, perhaps what they were truly questioning was not racial appearance, but biological authenticity. Not skin color, but bloodline. This is where the story crosses a dangerous threshold, because it no longer remains a matter of interpersonal conflict or family betrayal. It becomes a question about the very structure of monarchy, lineage, heritage, and legitimacy. Royal babies aren't just children. They're heirs, bearers of tradition, symbols of continuity. The idea that one of them may have entered the world through deception threatens to unravel centuries of protocol. Of course, none of this was publicly confirmed by the palace. No one in the royal family ever accused Meghan of surrogacy or deception. But the possibility that such theories were internally floated, or that people like Thomas Markle believed them, creates an entirely new layer to the Oprah fallout. This context is crucial for understanding how Thomas's claim about the fake bump came to hold such explosive potential. He didn't make it in a vacuum. He made it in the aftermath of a televised interview where the royal institution was painted as discriminatory, cold, and outdated. He made it after years of estrangement, of watching his daughter's image morph from struggling actress to duchess, to global celebrity, to controversial figure. And he made it after enduring relentless criticism from media and Meghan supporters who accused him of betrayal. Thomas Markle, whether intentionally or not, was about to shift the spotlight back to Meghan. Not by denying her claims of emotional distress or challenging her recounting of private conversations, but by attacking the foundational truth of the pregnancy itself. If Archie's birth was the pinnacle of Meghan and Harry's new life, a symbol of love, rebellion, and change, then Thomas was challenging that symbol with a story that cast shadows on everything the couple had built their narrative upon. But how credible is Thomas Markle? This is the question many were quick to ask. He had once staged paparazzi photos. He had sold interviews. He had publicly shared private letters. And he had, on more than one occasion, been painted as erratic and bitter. Yet others argue that the same could be said about many whistleblowers throughout history. Questionable behavior does not necessarily mean false testimony. What makes this situation so complex is the emotional charge it carries. We are not just dealing with facts and timelines. We are dealing with a father who believes he was discarded, a daughter who says she was abandoned, and a public that feels caught between two dramatically different versions of the same family. The Oprah interview did many things. It reshaped how the world saw the monarchy. It brought mental health into the forefront of royal discourse. It prompted international reactions from politicians, celebrities, and citizens. But it also may have accidentally cracked open a far deeper mystery, one that, at the time, few were prepared to confront. As the dust settled in the weeks following the broadcast, one thing became clear. The story of Meghan and Harry was no longer a love story. It was a cultural war, a battle of narratives. And in this war, truth became both weapon and casualty. By the time Thomas Markle's quiet claim began reaching journalists' inboxes, many were exhausted by the sheer volume of royal drama. But some couldn't ignore the implications. The Oprah interview was not the final chapter. It was the spark. And now, as more light is being shed on what may have really happened during Meghan's pregnancy, that spark threatens to ignite a new, far more volatile firestorm. Before Meghan Markle became the Duchess of Sussex, before the global press stalked her every move, and before she graced the world stage in designer gowns, she was simply Meghan. A biracial girl raised in Los Angeles, shuttling between the worlds of her black mother, Doria Ragland, and her white father, Thomas Markle. For all the fame and controversy that has since surrounded her life, her childhood was surprisingly ordinary, and much of it was shaped by her father. Thomas Markle, now a retired lighting director and television technician, was not always a tabloid fixture. He was, by all accounts, a hardworking man who built a successful career behind the camera. His work earned him accolades, including an Emmy Award, and placed him within arm's reach of the Hollywood dream. But his real ambition, he would later say, wasn't found on studio sets. It was centered on his daughter, the little girl he adored and supported at every turn. People who knew the Markles during Meghan's early years often described Thomas as a proud and doting father. He would take her to sets, exposing her to the production side of television and film. She saw cameras, scripts, and lighting rigs, all before she ever stepped in front of one herself. This early exposure would later help Meghan understand the power of image, lighting, and framing skills that critics argue she still uses masterfully. What's more important, however, is the portrait of a man who genuinely seemed to love his child. Thomas has repeatedly stated that he paid for Meghan's private schooling and helped finance her college education at Northwestern University. When her acting career began to bloom, he was allegedly her biggest cheerleader. He reportedly sent care packages, helped with rent when work was scarce, and stayed in regular contact as she navigated auditions, rejections, and... For Thomas, this investment wasn't just financial. It was emotional. He believed in Meghan, and he wanted her to succeed. Friends say he often spoke of her with pride, sometimes even sharing her headshots with colleagues or showing off clips of her acting performances. Even after her breakout role in the legal drama Suits, Thomas reportedly remained in touch and often gave fatherly advice from afar. Their bond seemed unshakable. That is why the breakdown of their relationship came as such a shock, first to those around them, and then to the entire world. Everything began to change when Meghan met Prince Harry. According to Thomas, their communication began to fray shortly after the relationship went public. He claims Meghan became more guarded, more distant, and increasingly influenced by her new royal environment. In his telling, The casual father-daughter chats they once shared gave way to carefully managed calls, sometimes filtered through assistants or third parties. When the engagement was announced in November 2017, Thomas says he was informed via a short call, not by Meghan directly, but by someone on her team. The media frenzy that followed the engagement announcement only made matters worse. Reporters descended on Thomas's quiet Mexican neighborhood, snapping photos and hounding him for interviews. At first, he tried to remain out of sight, but then came the scandal that would turn him into a global figure overnight: the staged paparazzi photos. Just days before the royal wedding in May 2018, it was revealed that Thomas had colluded with a photographer to stage a series of flattering images showing him preparing for the wedding, reading royal history, being fitted for a suit, and getting ready for his role in the ceremony. When this was exposed, the backlash was swift. Critics accused him of exploiting his daughter's fame. Royal insiders allegedly warned Meghan that her father was becoming a liability. Thomas, meanwhile, said he only agreed to the photos because he wanted to rehabilitate his image after being portrayed as reclusive and out of shape. Then came the supposed heart attack. Thomas claimed he suffered a serious cardiac event in the days leading up to the wedding and was unable to travel to the UK. Whether his condition was real or exaggerated remains debated. Some believe he used it as an excuse to avoid the wedding amid the paparazzi scandal. Others argue he was genuinely ill and overwhelmed by the stress. Regardless, Thomas did not walk Meghan down the aisle. That role was ultimately filled by Prince Charles. From that point forward, the bond between father and daughter fractured beyond recognition. In the years following the wedding, Thomas made repeated attempts to reach Meghan. He gave interviews to tabloids and British morning shows, expressing pain and confusion over her silence. He shared a handwritten letter Meghan had sent him, meant to be private, and read parts of it on national television. He spoke of not being invited to meet his grandson Archie. He pleaded for reconciliation, sometimes tearfully, other times angrily. With each appearance, public opinion split further. Was Thomas a grieving father or a fame-seeking opportunist? From Meghan's side, the silence was near total. In interviews, she rarely spoke of him, and when she did, it was usually in a guarded, melancholic tone. She told Oprah that she felt betrayed by her father, particularly for working with the tabloids. She said she could not imagine ever trusting him again. That one phrase, "I just don't know how we can rebuild after that," carried a finality that crushed many hopes for a reunion. Still, Thomas did not stop talking. He continued to release letters, offer opinions, and claim he wanted nothing more than to see his daughter happy. The more Meghan ignored him, the more interviews he gave. He was called toxic by her defenders and honest by her detractors. When Harry and Meghan relocated to the United States and stepped down as senior royals, Thomas claimed he hoped it would create space for reconnection. It didn't. Yet through all of this, what often got lost in the noise was the emotional core of the man making the statements. Thomas wasn't a faceless critic. He was her father, a man who had once changed diapers, driven her to school, helped her run lines, and told friends he believed she would do great things. He was now a man watching her life unfold from a distance, through glossy magazines and Netflix specials, his only contact with his grandchildren coming through media coverage. Some believe that pain, rather than malice, is what eventually drove Thomas to reveal what he says he saw during that early 2019 visit. According to those familiar with the event, Thomas wasn't looking to attack Meghan with the fake baby bump story. He wasn't trying to destroy her credibility or dismantle her image. He was trying, in his own words, to understand what happened, why she had shut him out, why she refused to speak, and why, during that brief visit, she seemed like a different person entirely. He has said that the Meghan he saw in 2019 was cold, guarded, and visibly uncomfortable in his presence. She wasn't cruel, he noted, but she was distant. And when he brought up the strange strap he saw under her dress, her response was swift and commanding. "Don't mention that again," she told him, according to his version of events. Then she left the room. That moment, he says, was the final confirmation that something about her pregnancy wasn't right. Whether or not you believe Thomas Markle, the emotional backdrop of his claim cannot be ignored. This is a man whose world once revolved around his daughter. A man who spent decades supporting her dreams. And now, he finds himself on the outside of her life, watched suspiciously by the public, vilified by some and pitted by others. It is from this place, somewhere between grief and indignation, that his most shocking claim emerged. This chapter of the story is not just about facts. It's about emotion, betrayal, and the collapse of a relationship that once seemed solid. Thomas's role as a father has become the lens through which the world now views him. Is he the desperate parent of a powerful woman who left him behind? Or is he a calculating media figure trying to claw his way back into relevance? As the story continues to unfold, those questions will only become more pressing. For now, all we know is that his claim about the fake bump has reopened wounds that were never truly healed and exposed just how far the divide between Meghan and her father has grown. It was a quiet moment, never mentioned in the press, never photographed, and never publicly confirmed until now. Long before the bombshell Oprah interview or the release of the couple's Netflix series, before the Sussexes' dramatic split from the royal family had fully unfolded, there was a singular encounter that may have changed everything. A meeting so private, so unrecorded, that only the two people involved knew it happened, until one of them broke the silence. Thomas Markle claims that in early 2019, just months before Meghan was due to give birth to Archie, he met with his daughter in a short, tense, and awkward reunion. The world had assumed that the father and daughter were no longer speaking by that point. After all, their last publicly known exchange had been shrouded in betrayal, media manipulation, and broken trust. Meghan had written him a heartfelt letter pleading with him to stop working with the tabloids. He had, in turn, handed it to the press. From that point on, all signs pointed to a total communication blackout. But Thomas insists that the story was more complicated and far more secretive than anyone realized. According to his account, the meeting was not arranged through official palace channels or with Meghan's enthusiastic approval. It was the product of quiet back-channel communications, largely facilitated by a mutual third party whose name Thomas has refused to publicly disclose. It was this person, he says, who convinced Meghan to agree to a brief, informal, and entirely off-the-record visit, away from photographers and media scrutiny. The conditions were strict: no phones, no press, no entourage, and no discussion of their past conflicts. For Thomas, the invitation felt like a miracle. It was his first real opportunity to see Meghan since the wedding fiasco. He had missed walking her down the aisle, missed meeting Harry in person, and had watched from the sidelines as his daughter rose to become one of the most talked-about women on the planet. This visit, however brief, was his chance to make things right, or at the very least, to begin the process of healing. He expected it would be emotionally heavy, but he was willing to bear the weight. He did not expect what happened next. Thomas recalls being driven to a private estate in California, a place he refused to name for security reasons. Meghan was already inside when he arrived. He says she greeted him, not warmly, but not with hostility either, just an air of caution. She wore a simple dress, modest and flowing, with a coat loosely draped over her shoulders. At the time, Meghan was widely believed to be 7 or 8 months pregnant, depending on varying public timelines. Thomas expected to see the usual signs of advanced pregnancy: labored movement, swollen feet, a heaviness in demeanor. But instead, he says, she moved fluidly, almost too easily, as though unencumbered. Still, he tried not to let his thoughts spiral. This was his daughter, after all. The meeting itself was surreal enough. They sat down in a small living room, where the conversation began in tentative tones. He asked her how she was feeling. She said she was tired but excited. He tried to tell her that he regretted everything that had gone wrong around the wedding. She nodded, barely acknowledging it, and changed the subject. Then came the moment that would replay in his mind endlessly over the months and years that followed. At some point during the visit, Meghan stood to grab something from a nearby table. As she turned, the fabric of her dress caught on the edge of a chair. Thomas says he watched as she reached back to adjust the dress, and that's when he saw it. A faint but unmistakable strap, running horizontally across her abdomen, just below where the baby bump appeared to sit. It looked like it was holding something in place. For a split second, the material lifted enough to reveal what he believed was the edge of a synthetic belly. It wasn't the smooth curvature of flesh. It was rounded but rigid, the color slightly off from the skin above it. In that moment, Thomas says, everything stopped. He blinked. Meghan had turned away, her back to him. He says he rose slightly from his seat, trying to see if his eyes were deceiving him. Had he imagined it? Was it a trick of the light, or perhaps a maternity support garment? But no, he was convinced of what he had seen. It looked, to him, like a silicone pregnancy belly. And the strap? It wasn't the kind worn for back support. It had a distinct buckle and a faint outline that suggested it wrapped all the way around her body. Stunned, Thomas said the first thing that came to his mind. "What's that?" Meghan froze, then slowly turned around. According to Thomas, she didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't try to hide. She simply looked at him and said, very calmly, "Don't mention that again." Her voice was quiet but firm, final. It was not a request. It was a command. She then excused herself and walked into another room. When she returned minutes later, the coat she had worn at the beginning of the meeting was buttoned tightly across her chest. The rest of the visit was brief and strained. Small talk, polite nods, no further discussion of what had just occurred. When the car returned to pick him up, Thomas left without asking any more questions. He didn't want to break whatever fragile truce had been temporarily formed. But the image of that strap, the shape beneath the dress, haunted him. In the months that followed, Thomas wrestled with what he had seen. He replayed the visit in his mind, searching for alternative explanations. Was it a maternity harness? A new type of supportive wear? Could he have misinterpreted what he saw in that brief moment? But the more he thought about it, the more he became convinced that he hadn't been mistaken. He knew Meghan's body. He had seen her pregnant, or so he thought. But now, doubts crept in where certainty once stood. Publicly, he said nothing. Privately, he told a few close friends. One of them, a retired TV producer who had known Thomas for over 20 years, later said he was deeply disturbed by the story. He wasn't excited about what he saw, the friend said. He looked ashamed, confused, like he'd just discovered something he didn't want to believe. So why didn't Thomas come forward sooner? Why wait until now to tell the world what he saw? The answer, according to him, is complicated. He didn't want to destroy Meghan's reputation. He didn't want to appear vindictive or jealous. And most of all, he didn't want to be responsible for another wave of vicious headlines and online abuse. He was already the villain in much of the public's eyes. Accusing his daughter of faking her pregnancy would solidify that image. But as time passed, and as he remained cut off from Meghan and his grandchildren, he began to feel that silence was a form of complicity. He started hinting at it subtly in off-the-record conversations with journalists. When asked about Archie's birth, he would sometimes pause before answering or make vague comments about strange timelines and unanswered questions. Eventually, he shared the full story with a trusted independent reporter. It wasn't an exclusive deal. There was no financial exchange. It was, as the reporter later wrote, a confession from a man who had nothing left to lose. Naturally, the claim was met with skepticism. Royal watchers, journalists, and commentators demanded evidence. But Thomas had none. No photos, no recordings, no one else in the room. Just his word, his story. And the image burned into his memory. What makes this particular account so difficult to dismiss is the context in which it occurred. At the time of the alleged visit, Meghan was nearing the end of her pregnancy. Public interest in her maternity style was at an all-time high. There had already been online speculation that her baby bump appeared to shift in size, that she could bend and crouch in ways most pregnant women couldn't. There were theories, laughably dismissed by mainstream media, that Meghan was using a prosthetic belly. At the time, such claims were labeled as racist or misogynistic attacks by those looking to discredit a strong woman of color entering a historically white institution. But now, with her own father making the claim, the narrative has changed. It is no longer a fringe theory whispered in internet forums. It is a first-hand account from someone who knew her well. Someone who had no clear incentive to lie at this point in his life. Someone who, for better or worse, had already lost almost everything. The secret visit of 2019 has now become a pivotal moment in this unfolding drama. Not because it proves anything conclusively, but because it offers a missing puzzle piece in a story that has always felt partially obscured. If what Thomas says is true, it changes the meaning of everything that followed: the secrecy around Archie's birth, the refusal to show photos outside the hospital, the palace's silence, and Meghan and Harry's insistence on privacy. This chapter does not aim to prove or disprove Thomas Markle's claim. That will be left to investigators, experts, and public opinion. But what it does reveal is that even in the most highly controlled royal narratives, there can be moments of fracture. Moments when something slips through the seams. And if that something was, in fact, a strap beneath a dress, then the implications are nothing short of seismic. While Thomas Markle's revelation about a silicone bump strap was not made public until recently, the suspicions he now fuels had already existed long before. In fact, even during Meghan Markle's public pregnancy in 2018 and early 2019, an undercurrent of doubt was steadily growing online, driven not by major news outlets at first, but by independent observers, amateur sleuths, fashion enthusiasts, and maternity experts who began noticing inconsistencies in Meghan's appearance and behavior. The digital age allows for instant information, but it also creates space for mass speculation. On platforms like Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube, thousands of users began compiling clips, zooming in on photographs, and slowing down video footage from Meghan's public engagements. And what they found, or believed they found, was deeply unsettling to them. Claims ranged from bump inconsistencies to unnatural movement patterns, and for many, these inconsistencies were red flags pointing towards something unusual. One of the earliest moments that raised suspicion came during Meghan's visit to the National Theatre in January 2019. In a now widely circulated video, Meghan is seen walking through the lobby, wearing a cream-colored ensemble with a prominent baby bump. As she bends down to adjust her coat, the bump appears to fold unnaturally, seemingly creasing at the center. Critics online dubbed it the collapsing bump moment, and the video quickly racked up millions of views, prompting headlines like, "Did Meghan's bump just fold? And is the Duchess faking it?" At first, most mainstream media outlets ignored the chatter, chalking it up to misogyny or body shaming. And to be fair, many of the comments were unkind, with critics unfairly attacking Meghan's body and questioning her worthiness as a royal. But among the noise, some voices pointed out what they believed were genuine inconsistencies. They noted how Meghan's bump seemed to shift sizes between appearances just days apart. In one engagement, her bump would appear high and firm. In another, it would look lower, looser, or even absent. While maternity experts admitted that bumps can change shape depending on posture, clothing, and lighting, they also stated that such dramatic differences, especially within 48-hour windows, were unusual. Another moment often cited is Meghan's appearance at the Endeavour Fund Awards in February 2019. As she walked beside Prince Harry, many online commentators claimed that her bump appeared unusually low for a woman said to be over 7 months pregnant. Others observed that she bent down repeatedly with ease, squatted to pick up dropped items, and walked with a lightness uncommon in late pregnancy. Pregnant women who had experienced their own third trimesters shared their views, saying that Meghan's movements didn't align with their own physical limitations during that stage. Some users also noticed that Meghan frequently cradled her bump during public appearances, often placing both hands on it as if to draw attention to it. While some interpreted this as a natural and nurturing gesture, others questioned whether it was a way to prevent the bump from shifting or sliding out of place. A theory emerged that she was subtly adjusting a prosthetic belly under her dresses, using her hands to stabilize or reposition it during photo ops. These suspicions reached a crescendo during Meghan's appearance at the Commonwealth Day service in March 2019. Wearing a white Victoria Beckham dress, Meghan looked radiant. But according to skeptics, her bump once again appeared smaller than it had during engagements just days prior. This sparked renewed online interest, and social media was flooded with side-by-side comparisons showing different bump shapes, sizes, and placements over the course of a single week. Hashtags like #MooBump and #MeghanSurrogate trended briefly on Twitter, and YouTube channels dedicated entire episodes to dissecting each outfit, movement, and photograph. At the time, the British press largely refused to report on these speculations. Mainstream journalists argued that such rumors were cruel, invasive, and grounded in conspiracy theories. Royal correspondents instead focused on more palatable narratives, Meghan's fashion choices, her growing confidence as a royal, and her preparations for motherhood. But the more these suspicions were ignored or ridiculed, the more fervently they spread in alternative circles online. The idea that Meghan was hiding a secret pregnancy or faking one altogether began to take root in a segment of the population already distrustful of the royal institution, celebrity culture, and the media establishment. What made these theories especially potent was their visual nature. In the age of Instagram and TikTok, video clips and photo comparisons carry more weight than written opinion. People who might otherwise dismiss wild claims found themselves staring at loops of Meghan's bump folding, shrinking, or shifting. The visuals created cognitive dissonance. They could see the bump, but they couldn't reconcile it with the rules of biology they thought they knew. And once doubt sets in, it is very hard to shake. Theories about fake pregnancies aren't new in the world of celebrity gossip. Beyoncé, Katie Holmes, and even Nicole Kidman have faced similar accusations in the past, most often by fringe tabloids or internet trolls. In Beyoncé's case, a clip from a talk show where her bump appeared to fold led to months of speculation that she had used a surrogate. Her team denied it, and eventually the conversation died down. But Meghan's case was different because she was not just a celebrity, but a royal. The stakes were higher, the optics more sensitive, the protocols more rigid. And then came the secrecy surrounding Archie's birth. Unlike previous royal babies, Meghan and Harry chose not to participate in the traditional photo call on the hospital steps. There was no proud wave outside the Lindo wing, no red dress and beaming smile as seen with Princess Diana or Kate Middleton. Instead, the couple announced that Meghan had gone into labor only after the baby had been born, and they released a carefully curated photo 2 days later, indoors at Windsor Castle. The image showed Meghan in a white dress, her figure already slimmed down, holding baby Archie alongside Prince Harry and Queen Elizabeth. Critics noted that the timing, the setting, and the lack of transparency only fueled the surrogate theory further. Why hide the labor details? Why avoid cameras? Why break with royal tradition? Supporters argued it was Meghan's right to preserve her privacy. She had faced unprecedented scrutiny during her pregnancy, and perhaps she simply didn't want to perform motherhood for the cameras. They pointed out that Meghan had already endured relentless press attacks, and this was a form of reclaiming agency. But others saw it differently. To them, it was further evidence of a cover-up. They speculated that Meghan had never given birth herself, and that the hospital secrecy was designed to shield that fact from the public eye. Tabloids eventually began to pick up on the whispers, albeit cautiously. A few ran speculative articles asking why the Sussexes were being so secretive. Some columnists questioned the wisdom of abandoning royal traditions that had worked for decades. But none dared touch the core of the theory, the possibility that Meghan had used a surrogate or worse, faked the entire pregnancy. Doing so would risk accusations of misogyny, racism, and conspiracy-mongering. Most media organizations weren't willing to take that chance. Privately, however, some journalists began to dig. Anonymous sources at luxury maternity clinics in Los Angeles were contacted. Surrogacy agencies were approached. Medical experts were asked to comment on pregnancy patterns, and fashion insiders were consulted about the use of prosthetic bumps in public life. While no conclusive evidence emerged, a pattern of circumstantial oddities began to take shape. No hospital records were made public. No medical staff came forward. No one seemed able to confirm precisely where Archie was born. And now, years later, with Thomas Markle's claim entering the public discourse, those old red flags are being revisited with renewed seriousness. His statement about seeing the strap aligns eerily with the very suspicions that internet sleuths have been raising for years. To those who have followed the saga closely, it feels like confirmation. To others, it raises more questions than answers. The implications are immense. If Meghan did, in fact, wear a fake bump, it suggests that the royal family, willingly or otherwise, was complicit in maintaining a fiction. It would mean that global media organizations were either duped or too afraid to pursue the story. It would call into question every public appearance, every smiling photo, every speech about motherhood delivered during that time. It would also place Meghan's critics in a new light, not as conspiracy theorists, but as whistleblowers who were silenced and shamed for raising uncomfortable truths. Of course, there are still many who dismiss all of this as nonsense. They argue that pregnancy looks different on every woman, that camera angles and lighting can play tricks, and that Meghan had every right to carry her child as she saw fit. They see the red flags as cherry-picked data, confirmation bias fueled by dislike or prejudice. But in the court of public opinion, evidence isn't always the final judge. Perception often carries equal weight. And right now, perception is shifting. With Thomas Markle's story now entering the mainstream, media organizations are being forced to re-examine their past assumptions. Editors who once dismissed Bumpgate as clickbait are assigning reporters to investigate the claims. Medical experts are being brought on for commentary. Public interest is surging again, and what was once dismissed as fringe conspiracy is now being taken seriously by major platforms. As the narrative evolves, so too does the scrutiny. Meghan's public pregnancy, once considered an untouchable symbol of modern royal motherhood, is now being examined under a microscope. Every photo, every clip, every outfit is being reanalyzed in the context of Thomas Markle's claim. The red flags were there. The public saw them. The media ignored them. And now, the story may be coming full circle. When allegations strike at the heart of royal protocol, particularly one as sensitive and potentially destabilizing as claims surrounding a royal pregnancy, the institution's first instinct is almost always to retreat into silence. The British monarchy, steeped in centuries of tradition, has developed a time-tested method for handling scandal: stoicism. Say nothing, do nothing publicly, and allow the noise to burn itself out. But in the case of Meghan Markle's pregnancy, the emergence of Thomas Markle's recent claim about a fake baby bump has forced the public to scrutinize whether the palace's silence was prudence, complicity, or calculated containment. To understand how Buckingham Palace may have responded internally, or not at all, one must consider the monarchy's consistent policy: never complain, never explain. This mantra has guided countless royal crises, from Queen Elizabeth's reserved response to Princess Diana's tragic death, to more recent controversies surrounding Prince Andrew. But Meghan's pregnancy was different. It wasn't just a royal milestone. It was a media phenomenon, one that was carefully curated and emotionally loaded with symbolism. The birth of Archie was poised to be historic. He was the first mixed-race child born into the British royal family in modern history, a living emblem of the monarchy's evolution. The palace could not afford a public relations mishap during Meghan's pregnancy. Every step was choreographed, from public appearances to the carefully staged post-birth photo session at Windsor. And yet, from the very beginning, internal dynamics suggested that not everything was harmonious. Sources close to the royal household have long whispered about a lack of clarity and communication between Meghan, Harry, and senior palace staff during the pregnancy. It began with minor tensions: Meghan's insistence on choosing her own medical team, rather than relying on the traditional royal obstetricians, raised eyebrows. Though not unprecedented, it was unusual. Royal births are often overseen by physicians trusted by the palace, not only for medical reasons but for security and record-keeping purposes. Meghan's desire to step outside that framework hinted at a desire to assert control over her own narrative. Then came the birth announcement. On May 6, 2019, at approximately 5:26 a.m., Meghan reportedly gave birth to Archie at the Portland Hospital in London, a private and discreet facility favored by high-profile individuals. But the Royal Communications Office did not confirm the birth until nearly 8 hours later. The initial statement declared Meghan was in labor, despite the fact that Archie had already arrived. By the time reporters scrambled to cover the story, the baby was already born, and the Sussexes were nowhere to be found. This timeline immediately raised suspicions. Why mislead the press about the labor status? Why announce a birth after the fact, in a delayed and vague manner? Some royal correspondents speculated it was simply an effort to maintain privacy. Others saw it as a deliberate attempt to control the story, especially in light of the couple's increasingly tense relationship with the press. Inside the palace, not everyone was pleased. Multiple insiders who later spoke under condition of anonymity said that Meghan and Harry's decision to withhold details of Archie's birth caused confusion and frustration among senior courtiers. One aide reportedly described the communication process as chaotic and unprecedented. Another said there was a clear sense of obstruction coming from the Sussexes team, even when palace staff attempted to coordinate logistics for the baby's arrival. None of these concerns, however, were aired publicly. The palace, true to form, maintained a respectful silence. Official statements congratulated the couple. The Queen was said to be delighted, and Charles expressed his joy through official channels. But behind closed doors, some suspected that Meghan and Harry's unorthodox approach to the birth announcement was just the surface of a deeper issue. One area that has generated particular interest is the lack of verifiable medical documentation. Traditionally, royal births are accompanied by formal bulletins signed by attending physicians, which are later released to the public. In the case of Archie, no such document was issued. The public never saw a signed statement from doctors confirming the details of the birth. The absence of such a document was not illegal, but it was highly unusual and noted quietly by longtime royal observers. This lack of transparency fed into growing online speculation. If Meghan had not delivered Archie herself, and a surrogate had been used, then the secrecy around the birth suddenly made sense. It would explain the misleading labor announcement, the absence of a hospital photo, and the decision to skip the traditional Lindo wing appearance. It would also explain the palace's internal discomfort and the deliberate vagueness in their press releases. Yet, the palace remained mute. Even as rumors swirled online, bolstered by photo analysis and amateur investigative videos, there was no official comment from Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, or Clarence House. No one refuted the claims. No one confirmed them. This silence was interpreted differently depending on who you asked. To supporters of Meghan and Harry, it was a dignified refusal to engage with racist and misogynistic conspiracy theories. To skeptics, it was strategic avoidance, an effort to let the scandal die quietly, without triggering a media firestorm. One person who attempted to address the tension publicly was Prince William. When pressed by a journalist shortly after the Oprah interview aired, William declared, "We are very much not a racist family," but stopped short of addressing any specifics about Meghan's pregnancy. His words were widely covered, but they only fueled further speculation about what else he wasn't saying. Was he simply defending the institution, or had he himself harbored doubts? It's important to understand that within the palace hierarchy, transparency is not the norm. Royal traditions thrive on discretion and control. Leaks are rare and often punished. Staff are bound by strict confidentiality agreements. And yet, despite these barriers, some murmurs have slipped through. One former palace insider, speaking anonymously to a European outlet in late 2020, claimed that there were concerns about optics during Meghan's pregnancy. When asked what that meant, the insider elaborated, the timing, the presentation, the approach, it all deviated from tradition in a way that felt deliberate. There were meetings. People were confused. But no one wanted to say anything. You don't question a royal's pregnancy. That reluctance to question, even when logic or precedent suggests otherwise, is central to how the palace functions. It's not just about protecting the royal image. It's about preserving the illusion of perfection. Admitting that something might be amiss in a royal birth opens the door to constitutional complications. Archie, as the son of a prince, holds a place in the line of succession. If he were born via surrogate and that fact was concealed, it could raise complex legal and ethical questions, especially within the framework of royal inheritance and lineage. Still, there were ways the palace could have addressed the situation more transparently, if only to shut down growing suspicion. They could have provided a signed medical statement. They could have released a hospital photo, as had been tradition. They could have allowed a brief appearance on the hospital steps. None of these actions would have invaded Meghan's privacy to an unacceptable degree. Instead, their refusal to follow precedent only intensified the doubts. And now, with Thomas Markle's voice joining the chorus, the palace's silence has become louder than ever. Some royal watchers believe that the institution may have known about the use of a surrogate, or at least suspected it, but chose to play along for the sake of unity and appearance. Others think that if a surrogate was used, even Harry may not have been fully aware of the decision at the time. Meghan's autonomy, they argue, may have extended so far as to allow her to make reproductive choices without full royal approval. Whatever the truth may be, the royal family's unwillingness to comment has become its own form of statement. By refusing to acknowledge the growing controversy, the palace may be hoping it fades away. But in the age of digital memory and viral content, stories don't fade. They resurface. They res hair. They recontextualize themselves in light of new information. And now, with Meghan's father claiming to have seen physical evidence of a fake pregnancy, the palace's earlier inaction is under new scrutiny. What did they know? When did they know it? And why did they say nothing? These questions will only grow louder. And without answers, the speculation will continue to expand. The royal family, once shielded by tradition and distance, now finds itself operating in a world where secrets rarely stay hidden. The public demands more than polite statements. They want transparency, accountability, and truth. To the outside world, Meghan Markle has always projected a carefully balanced image. Part Hollywood glamour, part humanitarian idealist, part fiercely independent woman navigating the rigid corridors of monarchy. Her supporters often describe her as poised, progressive, and principled. Her critics, on the other hand, accuse her of being calculated, theatrical, and obsessed with controlling the narrative. At the center of this dichotomy is a woman who, since entering the royal spotlight, has fought fiercely for one thing above all else: autonomy. When the allegations from her father surfaced, the claim that he witnessed her wearing a fake pregnancy bump, it set off a cascade of questions about her integrity, about her choices, and perhaps most provocatively, about her version of the truth. But before any conclusions are drawn, it's critical to understand Meghan's side of the story. not merely in reaction to her father's claims, but as a broader context of how she's explained her pregnancy, her choices, and her understanding of public life under constant surveillance. From the very beginning, Meghan's approach to her pregnancy was markedly different from other royals. She and Prince Harry were transparent in their desire to do things their own way. In January 2019, Buckingham Palace confirmed that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would be establishing their own household, complete with a separate communications staff. While many saw this as a natural evolution in their growing independence, others interpreted it as the first clear indication that Meghan was no longer interested in playing by the palace rulebook. That independent streak extended to how she carried her pregnancy publicly. She appeared in elegant yet unconventional maternity fashion, form-fitting dresses, high heels, statement coats, all designed to show off her bump in a way that some commentators praised as confident and modern. Others said it was overly performative, almost like a production. But Meghan never seemed fazed. She appeared at event after event with her hands often placed firmly on her bump, a gesture that some found repetitive, even theatrical. Meghan, however, explained the gesture as protective and grounding. In interviews, she was always measured. She rarely addressed the specifics of her pregnancy experience in great detail, but she dropped hints about how overwhelming the attention had become. During a documentary interview in Africa, a reporter asked her if she was okay. Her eyes moistened as she replied, "Not many people have asked if I'm okay." That moment struck a chord with millions of viewers. It humanized her. It suggested vulnerability beneath the polish. And it spoke to the exhaustion she felt navigating motherhood under an unforgiving spotlight. Meghan's silence on many issues, however, has been a double-edged sword. By refusing to comment on rumors, be it the surrogate theory, the baby bump conspiracy, or her father's latest accusation, she allowed those narratives to evolve without resistance. Some might say that's dignified. Others argue it's strategic silence designed to maintain plausible deniability. Privately, Meghan is believed to have been deeply affected by the intense scrutiny over her pregnancy. Close friends who have spoken anonymously to select media outlets say that Meghan was stunned by the cruelty of some of the online commentary. One source described her as incredibly hurt that people were questioning whether she was even carrying her child. Another said that she deliberately chose not to respond publicly because she believed addressing such wild claims would only validate them. Yet, if Meghan had nothing to hide, why did she deviate from royal tradition so dramatically? This question is often posed by her detractors, who point to the absence of a hospital photo outside the Lindo wing, the delayed announcement of Archie's birth, and the couple's refusal to release full medical details. Meghan's defenders counter that she had every right to maintain her privacy during such a personal and intimate life event. They argue that the Lindo wing photo tradition was outdated and sexist, a relic of an era where women were expected to look perfect mere hours after labor. Indeed, Meghan and Harry's decision to keep Archie's birth largely private fits squarely within their broader push for independence. In the lead-up to the birth, the palace announced that the couple would not be sharing the birth plan or location with the public. It was the first time such secrecy had surrounded a royal birth in decades. Even Queen Elizabeth's children had their births announced swiftly and clearly, with traditional photos and signed documents from royal doctors. Meghan's supporters argue that this break from tradition wasn't about deception. It was about reclaiming agency over an experience that has historically been staged for public consumption. Still, Meghan's insistence on controlling the narrative did not quell speculation. In fact, it amplified it. The more she resisted the public's curiosity, the more that vacuum was filled with rumor. The bump-folding videos, the phantom hospital stay, the lack of formal medical documentation. All of these elements, combined with her very polished, physically active pregnancy, created a backdrop ripe for conspiracy theories. Meghan's strategy of silence may have been born from dignity, but in the age of viral content and online suspicion, it was a tactic that arguably backfired. And then, years later, came the Oprah interview. In this landmark sit-down, Meghan finally opened up about her experience inside the royal institution. While she did not discuss her pregnancy in extensive medical terms, she did reflect on how emotionally fraught it had been. She talked about how Archie was not going to be given a royal title or security detail, and how that decision had been made before he was even born. She linked that choice to concerns about how dark his skin might be, an explosive charge that set off a new firestorm of public scrutiny. But she never addressed the surrogate theory, the rumors of a fake pregnancy, or the many questions surrounding the circumstances of Archie's birth. Some observers saw this omission as deliberate. If there was nothing to hide, why not confront the rumors head-on? Meghan's defenders suggest that engaging with conspiracy theories only gives them oxygen. But her silence may have allowed them to smolder unchecked, until now, with her father's claim adding fuel to an already simmering controversy. One theory held by Meghan's supporters is that the speculation over her pregnancy was never about logistics, it was about control. From the moment she joined the royal family, Meghan was treated differently by the press and public alike. Her race, her nationality, her divorce status, her acting background, all of it made her a target. By refusing to conform to outdated traditions, by claiming ownership over her birth plan and appearance, she was asserting power. And that assertion challenged an institution that has never been comfortable with change. There's another element to consider: trauma. Meghan has spoken candidly about experiencing suicidal thoughts while pregnant. In her own words, she felt alone, unsupported, and trapped. If this is to be believed, and there's no reason to doubt it, then the pregnancy was not just a public spectacle for her. It was a deeply